That's okay.
All right, we're ready to go. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thanks, everyone. Good afternoon and welcome to the State Water Resources Control Board's Water Rights Fee Stakeholder Meeting. My name is David Ceccarelli. I'm the Chief of the Fee and Revenue Branch, and I will be facilitating this meeting along with help from my lead manager in the Fee and Revenue Branch, Clint Osterhage. Complying with the COVID-19 emergency safety guidelines today, today's meeting is being held remotely via a webcast and through Zoom. On February 11th, an amendment was sent out also on February 12th. The meeting handout was sent out through our Water Board's fee regulation LIRIS list, along with instructions on how to participate through the Zoom platform. I encourage anyone that's not signed up to the LIRIS fee regulation list, please do so. And on occasion, you'll be receiving notifications on our fee regulations. And the handout is also posted on our Water Board's fee webpage. And that webpage is waterboards.ca.gov/resources/fees/stakeholder. Individuals attending via Zoom will have an opportunity to ask questions or provide comments during the open discussion part of our meeting. If you're joining through the webcast, you can submit a comment or ask a question by emailing the email on the screen, which is waterrightsfees@waterboards.ca.gov. Today, we have many fee branch staff working behind the scenes to ensure that your experience as few participation bumps as possible. If any time throughout this event you find you are having technical difficulties, please email the waterrightsfees@waterboards.ca.gov. And I just want to acknowledge Gary Camillo, who is working behind the scenes, navigating through the Zoom system, and Itzi Abeda, who is one of our new fee managers at the Fee and Revenue Branch. And I just kind of wanted to introduce her, and you'll get familiar with her as the year goes on in the fee setting process, and she participates more in these meetings. Again, we thank you for joining us virtually today. We thank you for your patience as we move to 100% virtual meeting space. We're doing our best to ensure everyone can participate in an effective way. So let's just want to go over just a few meeting guidelines. Remember to use the handouts that were sent to you via email. If you don't have the handouts, don't worry. We'll be sharing the documents on the screen. You can request a copy of the documents after the meeting, and or go to, again, our fee webpage, which the handouts are also posted there. Please, if you're having any technical issues, please, during the meeting, please email us at waterrightsfees@waterboards.ca. The email that's posted there on the home screen right now. Please mute yourself when you're not speaking. And again, I just mentioned this one more time. Please remember to submit comments and questions throughout the event at the email there that's posted on the screen, waterrightsfees@waterboards.ca.gov. Before we go over today's agenda, I just wanted to highlight the purpose of today's meeting. This is the first of 3 stakeholder meetings as part of the fee setting process for fiscal year 21-22. Water Code requires the State Water Board to adjust annual fees each fiscal year to conform to the revenue levels set forth in the Budget Act. Staff reviews the Water Rights Fund program's fees on an annual basis and holds several stakeholder meetings throughout the year that coincide with the various iterations of the governor's budget. Today, we'll be discussing the budgetary expenditures on the Water Rights Fund from the governor's proposed budget and how these expenditures impact our water rights fee programs, highlighting the cost drivers from last year's budget to the governor's proposed budget. At today's meeting, since it's early in the fiscal year and we still are kind of determining our current expenditures, our revenues, determining what our fund condition is looking like. We're not going to go into a lot of details on potential fee adjustments for each of the programs. We'll be in a better position to discuss this at a future meeting. We'll have a follow-up meeting in June to discuss the May revised budget, and then finally in August to review the enacted budget. And our goal, staff's goal, is to present a fee structure to the board for consideration and adoption at the September 14th, 2021 board meeting. So at this time, I'll just briefly just kind of review the agenda. Of course, right now we're in the welcome and introduction phase. Second, we'll go over the water rights fund budget cost drivers. And then thirdly, we're going to have a discussion on Casa compliance. It's going to be led by the Division of Water Rights and Eric Eckhall, who is the Deputy Director of Water Rights. And so that'll be agenda item number 3. And then finally, we'll just have an open discussion and then next steps. Of course, during our agenda discussion, during any of our agenda discussion points, we'll take a brief opportunity and we'll ask for questions. Again, through the Zoom process, please just, the raise your hand feature, please utilize that. And then for those who are on the webcast, again, please send an email if you have any questions, and then we'll reach out to staff and we'll have those questions relayed and read through the broadcast right now. And we'll go ahead and take an opportunity to respond to those. So with that said, I'm going to move this over to to item number 2, to Glenn Osterhage, which is the Water Rights Fund budget cost drivers.
Thank you, David. And as an introduction for those that may be participating that are not familiar with me, as David indicated, I'm a branch manager in our fee branch. We only have one attachment to go over today. And I do want to note for those on the webcast, there is a typical delay. So some of the times if we're waiting for email questions to come through, depending on your connectivity speeds, maybe 30 seconds to a minute type of delay. I have a separate computer, mine's on about a 30-second delay. That's just my speed. So we'll try to manage that. So if you do send an email question in, be patient as we get caught up to what you're viewing on your screen. So we'll jump into item number 2, and if we can go to attachment number 1, please. Gotta wait for the screen to adjust here. Okay, so this is the first 2 boxes on here is typical for what we presented for the water rights. I will state, because I know we were asked, I think it was the August meeting, to show what we called the fund condition attachment that used to be shown. We're not quite ready to re-show that one yet. We're getting close. Those that are familiar with the fact that last year we were anywhere from 1.5 years to almost 2 years behind getting prior year reports to us to update our conditions. As of right now, we're hoping that the prior fiscal year, which we consider fiscal year 19-20, those final year numbers will hopefully be provided to us next month. So that's March, maybe rolling to early April. And with that, then we'll just be in our current year. And our accounting office, once they start doing the monthly updates for current year, they can usually turn those pretty quickly. So David and I are hoping, as he indicated, when we get to the June meeting, we'll be in a position to where we'll at least have the prior year numbers and maybe 9 months of actuals for the current year. So we'll be in a better state to estimate impacts of current year expenditures and revenue, obviously the prior year, and where we think our fund condition is. So those of you who are waiting for that one file, it has all the multiple years of showing revenue and expenditures. We are targeting to hopefully start providing that again at the June meeting. So with that, the first 2 tables on this chart are ones we provided before. The third one we'll get into in a moment because the naming convention of here is a little misleading, and we'll try to get that clarified. But for the budget, and this is the first chart up there, we set fees last year for water rights roughly at about $29.3 million for the budget. The current January proposed budget is at $30.8 million. So it's a $1.5 million increase, or roughly 5%. Of that, I'm going to drop down to the second box. The primary drivers of that, there's a couple of small ones. The state operations and pro rata are both pretty minimal. It's the middle box in there that we labeled removal of furlough salary savings. So those that are familiar with the budget last year, although the budget does not include any type of salary savings that was negotiated between the governor's office and the unions, it was anticipated that it would be in place for 2 years. So when we did our fee setting process last fall with our board, we assumed that that second year would carry over into fiscal year 21-22. There has been some communication to us that the state revenue may be in a better position, and they may be removing that salary savings out of there, which basically means we have a higher cost than what we were predicting before. So most people realize all state workers took roughly there's a percentage in there, but I'll round it to 9% pay cut. Those salary savings were passed on, in this case, to the Water Rights Fund at about $1 million. So there is a possibility that those costs may be put back into the program on this coming year. David, anything you want to add on that particular topic before I move on?
No, I just think this is just, again, kind of one of the somewhat, I will say unexpected, just because the fact that when during the kind of the budget process last year, and there were negotiations for basically almost a 2-year furlough savings of furlough salary adjustment, which provided some savings on the expenditure side for our funds. There was language in there that was triggered if revenues did come in at a certain point statewide, then the furloughs would be removed. So that's what's happened. But again, this is part of the Jan 10th budget process, the proposed governor's budget process. And it's in there for now. We'll see what happens come May revise. If it's in there, then our costs basically are just going back up to kind of the normal levels that they were prior to last year when the furloughs hit state employees. One thing I will mention is that although we haven't seen it, one thing that's out of our control when it comes to our staffing levels and our cost are the negotiations through the union process and with the legislators. And prior to last year's budget process, there were some negotiations and some approvals for some salary increases to certain unions, such as some of the technical positions, some of the admin at the state. Some of them range from 2 to 3%. Of course, those were not approved last year. And as of right now, those are not in. So we'll continue, when the May revised budget comes out, we'll look and see if anything has been negotiated or added into that point. But at this point, probably one of the biggest things, and again, when Glenn and I were doing the forecasting at last year, when we were looking at adjusting fees for last year and then moving into what we would think that the fees would look like moving into this fiscal year, we had built in some savings because we thought that the furloughs would still be in play. But as of right now, the governor's proposed budget has put us back to our full salaries.
Okay, thank you, David. So this last box, even though it's called fee increase deferral, is kind of a misnamed. We kind of threw this in here. I'm going to use the word, we're kind of hedging on some costs or expenditures that we're seeing for the current year that probably weren't projected when we set fees last year. Part of that was we had assumed some positions would normally stay vacant for say half a year or so. It turns out some positions got filled a little sooner than projected. All that means is we have some additional costs that are being absorbed this year that were not reflected when we set fees last fall. Most of you who were involved know that we did not take into consideration last year the condition of our fund because we didn't have the year-end reports updated. We didn't want to assume we had a reserve that could have offset or deferred some costs. It turns out that it looks like our fund reserve, and these are just very early estimates. I'm trying my best to dial it in, but our reserve may be a little bit less than we would normally target for this fund. It's usually between 5 and 10%. So this 3.3% reflected here is more of a hedge on the fact that, some of the analysis, some of the numbers we're seeing that have been updated even from last September are showing that we have less money in our fund. Now, if it turns out that current year expenditures are being held in control or other factors, some contract money may not being spent, and it helps our fund balance, hopefully that 3.3% will be a much smaller number. But really want to show there's a potential that there's some additional costs it looks like we're going to carry this year that were not included when we set fees. Those that may have access to the presentation that David did last year, we did indicate fees were assuming no staff and water rights were being held other than the FERC program that was separate. So David, I don't know if there's anything else you want to add, but this is just more kind of a hedge on a possibility, just so it doesn't come as a surprise when we do provide the information in June.
Correct. And just kind of looking at it also, just in a general percentages that we were looking at, we adjusted fees about 5.7% last year. And we were taking on the approach of basically 5.7% for the next couple of fiscal years. That was just kind of gliding it, kind of a smooth path here in the Water Rights Fund. Again, keep in account that that 3.6% wasn't included, was not kind of determined in that. We thought that we would still have some savings. So now that's kind of back into play. So we'll still continue to monitor it. As Glenn mentioned, I think we'll have further discussions and more accurate data when we come to our next meeting. We're able to display a fund condition along with what our revenues and our expenditures are projected to be. And then we could kind of start tying that down of what the adjustments of fees may look like in the water rights program.
Thanks, David. So again, knowing that there's the request to start supplying the fund condition report again, as indicated, our intent now is to provide that in June. I'm going to open it up. Anyone on Zoom, if you have any questions, go ahead and raise your hand. Anyone on the webcast, feel free to send in an email question. But we give it a little bit here just to see if we have anybody. Chuck, did you jump in line there?
Yeah, thank you very much. I just make sure I'm clear on this. So the overall, if these two tables here remain the same through June and August, you'd be seeing a total of 8.2% increase in the water rights fees.
Yeah, I wouldn't say they're totally additive, the 4.9 and 3.3, but I would say for most people looking at that, that's a good assumption to go on based off the current information we have. Again, we hope to have a more detailed breakdown of the information in June, but yeah, 8 to 9% would be realistic.
And you don't have it broken out by the various water right fee categories yet, but would it be, can you assume that they would be equally distributed, whatever their increase is, say 8% amongst all of them, or would be allocated in a different fashion?
Yeah, so part of that will come down to the FERC program. Obviously, those who were around last year, realize that side of the water rights held one position vacant this year. There was some changes on those who were filing the FERC fees. So there could be some impact. Program is going to spend time here between this meeting in June doing the analysis of the impacts of the FERC side. So depending on the shortage or overage, depending on how it turns out there, could impact. So at this point, I would not say it'll be an equal split across the programs. There's FERC, there's non-FERC, and there's a small piece for the cannabis side. We could end up recommending an even spread across the three, or once we get better analysis of the impacts of FERC, we'll have a determination of what we're going to do there. David, anything you want to add there before we have Danny jump in?
No, again, we'll monitor it closely. As Glenn mentioned, there was the 2019 Hoopa Valley Tribe FERC Commission decision, which FERC had found a waiver of some of the State Water Board Water Quality Certification Authority about, I believe it was around 13 projects last year. It resulted that these projects fell out paying the fee. So we did make some adjustments on our projects and our fees last year. We look at kind of the workload associated with the pre and the post license side of things. And part of the meeting last year, kind of keep those costs down. One position was being held in that program. So we'll take all those in determination. We try to carve that program out. We look at their cost, and then we look at the fees that they generate. And so we'll look at that. And then, of course, overall, we'll look at all the permits, license, applications, and things like that.
Chuck, any follow-up question before we pass it off to Danny?
Nope, that's it. Thank you.
Okay, Danny, you're up.
Thank you. You can hear me, right?
Yes.
Okay. So at the recent CFE conference, one of the water board attorneys, according to some legislators that gave me feedback, suggested that if this ends up being a severe drought year, that the water board would in fact go after legal water rights, basically curtail many of them, including some pre-1914 water rights where necessary. I know the answer to this, but I want to ask it anyway, just so that everybody's clear. If in fact the water board moves to do those types of things, will they refund some of the fees that people are paying for getting nothing?
So Eric or Aaron, are you on the line right now?
Yes,
Do you want to go ahead and respond to that question?
sure. At this point, we don't yet know if we're going to be in a position where we do have to issue notices of water unavailability. And based on some of the pending or ongoing litigation, I think it's very questionable whether or not we would go into pre-14s or anything other than the post-14 appropriative type rights. But the long and short of it is that no, we would not look to refund any fees during those types of years.
Thank you.
Anything else, Danny?
Nope, not yet.
Okay. Anybody else on Zoom? Again, if you want to raise your hand, we'll see you. Anyone? Gary, do we have any email questions to go over yet?
Yeah, we have one email question.
Okay.
A question from Butter Creek to summarize. Many are concerned that the fees will get too high. Will there be breaks for seniors or others? Also, will there be a way to give more input online after the meeting?
So David, you want to jump in first?
Well, we haven't looked at any type of like discounts or anything like that for seniors. Yes, there is an opportunity, and I was going to mention that if you'd like to contact us on an individual basis, we'd be more than happy to talk about our programs and our fees. And this kind of goes out to everybody. If after kind of looking at the charts and you have any questions prior to our next meeting and you'd like to meet with us one-on-one or set up an individual team or Zoom call, Glenn and I would be more than happy to kind of discuss the fee and the revenue side of the Water Rights Fund.
And basically, David covered what I was going to say. So yeah, you can always reach out to us individually. You can send any type of message to our fee inbox that we had up earlier, the water rights fees at waterboards.ca.gov, and we'll address that. Obviously, if you reach out to program staff and it's fee related, they'll route that to us as well. So a number of different ways to get a hold of us. And as far as the fees, again, we're not looking at proposing any type of actual fees at this point in time. Our goal, as previously stated, is to hopefully have a better idea going into June. Maybe at that time, understanding if there's a specific breakout to certain portions of water rights. The May revise, or actually the generally proposed budget, there's not currently a budget change proposal in play, so we don't have those costs to talk about. The May revise, they throw in there what's called a spring finance letter. So if any finance letters show up to us, we'll present that in June. So, we kind of have to wait to see what comes into the budget to kind of see how that impacts the various fee programs within the water rights. Gary, do you have any other questions yet?
No other questions, Glenn.
Okay. I've covered what I was going to talk about as far as agenda item number 2 and attachment 1. Again, later on, we're going to move over you can go ahead and put the agenda back up, Gary, I'd appreciate that. We're going to transition over to the program cost of compliance item, which is item number 3. We can always come back on item number 4 if something comes up and you have a question on what we just talked about as budget cost drivers. We can always circle back to that. So David, anything you want to add in before we hand it off to Eric and his team?
No. So yes, we'll just move this on to Eric. So the next agenda item is cost of compliance discussion.
Sure. I think this will probably actually be a pretty quick discussion. There were a couple of items flagged in discussions with Bob Gore, who raised the possibility of having a cost of compliance discussion about just general things and where we could maybe look at efficiencies for the program as a whole, and whether or not we could start with any particular items that I could raise, but then also turn it over to other stakeholders that are attending today or that are watching online or want to email an idea, and really use this as the start of a conversation. And I want to be very clear that there are no clear plans or directives or actions at this point, but these are something that we may want to collaboratively explore looking forward. And so I'll just start with maybe part A, and then I'll provide a high-level overview and turn it over to participants on the phone to see if they have other input or other discussions on that topic, and we'll kind of go through one by one. Does that sound good?
Yes.
All right. So the first is efficiencies in reporting and enforcement. And the specific thing I wanted to talk about here was the annual water use reports. These are due either April 1st or July 1st, depending on your type of right. And the enforcement section, in collaboration with our Office of Enforcement, then usually go through a number of steps and a number of efforts along with our reporting and quality assurance unit to make sure that folks have in fact submitted their reports on time. What we see overwhelmingly, this has been the case since about 2015 or 2016, and it's true for the reports that are due April 1st, that are true for the reports that are due, excuse my cat, they're true for those that are due July 1st, is that following the reporting deadline, April 1st or July 1st, the compliance rate is about 55% across the board. And over the next month or two, that compliance rate ticks up to over 80%. And then it kind of gradually, gets higher and higher after that. We generally don't look at the non-reporters that are less than 10 acre feet. So we don't pursue enforcement for those smaller reporters right now, which I think in the vast majority of cases is a reasonable prioritization of the division's workload. But what it does mean is that 2 times a year, we're essentially repeating the same process. And so I may be mixing up A and B a little bit. To keep it under kind of the annual filings, when we start an enforcement effort, there are a number of steps. And eventually we end up sending out anywhere from 500 to 1,000 ACLs every year. And those are for both post-14 appropriative rights, they're for statement filers. And there's a lot of work associated in getting people to file those reports and get them in on time, and then following up through enforcement mechanisms. And again, this is only for those that are larger than 10 acre feet. The question and the potential efficiency is whether or not some of this could be expedited and consolidated by converting some of the late filings to more of a late filing fee, which could alleviate the need for most enforcement. I won't say all of enforcement, but most of the enforcement related to failure to files, at least for the post-14 appropriative rights and related fee payers. There is a question, because statement filers don't pay fees, how would we capture this similar type of efficiency for those types of filers? And I think there is potentially an opportunity there to look at a broader enforcement policy that essentially hard bakes in a certain set level of penalty for a failure to file for statement filers. When we look at the workload that's associated with this effort, just within the division, and this is a couple years ago, we were figuring it was at least 4.2 to 4.5 PYs just for the failure to file effort. And that likely doesn't incorporate the full scope. So that was just on the enforcement side of the house. It didn't look at the hearing side of the house and kind of that related separated set of functions. And by converting this to more of a ministerial type of late fee, we think it would be easier for the fee payers, right? Instead of getting a kind of a nasty ACL in the mail, it's very clear. It's like the DMV. You failed to pay your car registration on time and you get a higher fee the next month. Much the same way, you failed to pay your water right fee on time or you failed to report on time, you get a little bit bump of an increase or a late fee. In doing so, if we look at the efficiencies there, we do think that we could free up a number of PYs. And we're not proposing that we would, cut those PYs, but we could redirect them to other high priority areas as needed or other enforcement areas and free up our own Office of Enforcement staff to work on whatever needed to be worked on. We see a similar type of issue emerging with SB 88, and the SB 88 question is still very much in its embryonic stage. We're looking at compliance, and our initial assessment for SB 88 is that compliance is extremely low, on the order of 3 to 4%, but we're still kind of working on those numbers, and we want to verify those before we do a broader rollout. But if we do get into a scenario where we have to enforce on SB 88 compliance, we think we could be in a similar type of scenario. And so with that, I think I will pause before we go into consolidated reporting dates and ask if there are any questions from the audience or from other listeners.
Now's your big chance.
We got Danny Merkley raised his hand. Go ahead, Danny.
So each year, you folks reach out to me to try to give a heads up to our members when people are very, very slow or late or non-existent at reporting. And I don't know after I do that if it's helped much or if maybe we're reaching out to the wrong folks. Maybe it's not our members. I really have no idea how that's working. But it is very frustrating when you guys tell me we've got 45% or 39% of folks that actually reported that we're supposed to, and it makes it tough on our members that are following the rules and are doing that stuff. If they see other folks that are just completely ignoring it. And I don't know that that's really as much a question as just a statement. But I would be interested to know that when I do reach out to our membership, and I do several ways, not just in Ag Alert, but direct contact on the executive directors who put it out in their weekly newsletters to their members, and a couple other venues we use. Is it making any kind of a difference?
So that's a great question. And I can give you a qualitative answer as opposed to a quantitative answer. But as we noted in April 1st or July 1st, usually that starting compliance rate is about 55%. Depending on when you do that outreach or when you do that reminder, we do see a significant bump in the next month or so. And my takeaway is that your outreach efforts do help significantly. just as a reminder from another source, and people get so many emails and other kind of form letters that it's difficult to track all these different things that come in. And so every opportunity that people can take to help remind of the reporting dates, although that does actually directly relate to Part B, which we'll get to in a minute, I think it helps, and it does overall increase compliance. And we do see a little bit of a breakdown in terms of who's failing to file by the size of their diversion, but it's not a perfect correlation and it's not uniform. We do have large diverters over 10,000 acre feet per year that fail to file. We have small, it's kind of a little bit weighted towards the smaller side, but not as much as maybe people might think.
And the other part of that is that you no longer send out notices to people. So that's something that they need to stay aware of on their own, right?
We do actually send out notices. In fact, I think we just did this last week, or they've just gone out today. And that's in the paper, old-fashioned USPS letter in your hand. So we did that last year. We did it again this year. We skipped 1 year, but we brought it back based on popular demand, if that's such a thing. I think one area we could look at also that would help is email addresses. And again, that's not going to get everybody, but when we look at our records, we only have emails for half of the water rights in our system. And I think nowadays, there are certainly going to be reporters that don't rely on email. There are certainly reporters that don't have email even. But I would also hazard a guess that the vast majority of water right holders in the state either have an email address themselves or have an agent or family or friend that relies on email that could help them out. And so if we can get better email reminders, that's a lot easier to send out an email blast to everybody that says, hey, remember to divert. We can't do that right now because we can't rely on it to reach the right number of people. So instead we burn staff time, resources. By the time we send out 20,000 letters at 55 cents each, it's not a cheap endeavor either. That all adds up. And so there's some technical efficiencies I think we could look at that go along with this.
Well, if maybe we could work with you this year ahead of time, and we can get some of that messaging out. Not only that email addresses might help, and that could help to drive down some costs, and maybe be a little bit more reliable. Even though the internet isn't always reliable, it's probably more reliable than the postal service.
Yep. So let's definitely do that. Let's maybe we'll set up a follow-up meeting where you can just kind of run through some timelines on our end and what Perfect. You might be able to do. Okay.
Good. We'll just do a check. Gary, do we get any other email questions before Eric moves on?
No other emails right now.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, great. For Part B, as we were just talking about, we have this multiple bites at the apple kind of issue where we have to do all of the heads up and the notification for those reports that are due April 1st, then do the exact same thing for those that are due July 1st. We have to repeat the data polls. We have to repeat the assessment of who's reported and who hasn't. So that's a cost driver on our end. I think it's also a cost driver for diverters. If you're paying a consultant to go out and do this twice, that's more expensive. If you consolidated those reporting dates, there may be a little more work if you looked in the kind of grand total hours for that initial statement. But I think if you were doing it twice is going to clearly be more in terms of workload in hours and kind of input than it would be if you combined them into a single reporting date. So I think there's significant cost savings at the division level, significant cost savings for diverters, and the opportunity to kind of streamline the whole enterprise. Historically, I'm not sure if this issue has been raised previously. When we've looked at it, we'd have to update the water code is our understanding to do it. So it would take legislation, but it's a relatively minor update to the water code as far as those types of updates go. I think there are some parts of the water code, or sorry, the code of regulations that we need to tweak or adjust to, but those are almost ministerial in approach. And so with that, I'll turn it over to audience questions.
Go ahead, Danny.
So can you explain that a little bit more? Because I don't have any water rights myself, and I'm not really familiar with this different reporting dates.
Sure. So right now there are two reporting dates for reporting your annual diversion volumes based on your type of right. And I'm grossly paraphrasing here, but post 14 appropriatives are due April 1st. Pre-14s and riparians are due July 1st. You kind of divide it by appropriative versus statement filers.
So what you're saying is then if somebody has both of those.
Yep.
Okay, that I understand now.
And you know, some people do report both at once. You can do that, but what we find is that most people don't. And one way or another, because we do have to repeat the process on our end, it does double our workload. So even if, you know, the individual right holder might only have one or the other, we're duplicating everything on our end, doing it twice, and that does result in additional costs on our end.
Okay.
And so the concept would be, let's consolidate that reporting date, bring it all to March 1st of each year, and then we're just kind of done with it.
Question online from Thor Larson. Eric mentioned low SB 88 reporting. How's this being tracked?
So I'll repeat the question to make sure I got it, but I mentioned some low compliance rates with SB 88. SB 88 was the metering and measurement regulations that were passed in 2015. There were other components of it as well. What SB 88 requires is that diverters above a certain size are required to submit, in addition to their annual volumes, a data file that shows how they've tracked their volumes. And that data file, depending on your size of diversion and your metering or measurement device, can have some different standards to it. So we track it two ways. The first is just looking at who's submitted a data file. And the initial numbers we had were really pretty low. We figured about 18% when we just looked at who had submitted. It's lower when we actually go into the files itself. And this is somewhere where we're still actively doing an investigation and trying to figure out, you know, how widespread this this issue is. But by our first cut, it's pretty widespread. And when we open the files, the data and information in those files is not usable. And that comes in a couple of different ways. Sometimes people scan in PDFs and it's hand-drawn notes. Well, we can't use those. We need a machine readable data file. So something like an Excel file or a tab delimited file that can be imported into a computer and compiled with other data. The data headings and formats, headings are indecipherable, empty, blank, or contain bad data. And sometimes the submitted file is just empty or refers to another website entirely. And those issues appear pretty significant. Again, we're kind of in the middle of doing a deeper dive and analysis, and we're hoping to have some broader information out in the next couple of weeks, at least for the larger diverters. We're also taking a look internally at what we need to do to make it a little easier to do that reporting. Do we need some templates? Do we need some clearer directions? Do we need to take a look at our regulations and maybe streamline them a little bit and clarify them a little bit? we don't know yet, but that's an active area of ongoing research because, you know, at whether it's 18% or whether it's 3 or 4%, it's still pretty low. And in those circumstances, we do know, at least on the data set that we had, that size doesn't have any role in kind of who's complied and who hasn't. The ratio of non-reporters is equal across all different size classifications.
It's interesting.
Okay.
You know, Eric, one other thing. This is
No other
Bob real
questions
quick.
at this time.
Well, this is Bob real quick. We're talking about consolidating reporting dates. We might want to think about consolidating types of reports too, if that's applicable.
In what context?
If somebody's required to report quarterly, maybe there could be semi-annual. I'm just thinking out loud. Maybe this isn't applicable. Help me here.
I don't think it's actually applicable. So even
Okay.
even the data files, even though it might have a smaller data step or data increment, still only need to be reported once a year. So that file comes in with your annual report, whether it's, you know, April 1st or July 1st at this point. The question you may be asking is, you know, with SB 88 and the metering and measurement regulations, there are some larger diverters that have a shorter time step in how they measure their diversion.
Yeah.
So some folks are hourly, some folks are daily, weekly, up to monthly. And we'd have to take a closer look there because it's still coming in annually. A lot of that finer resolution is going to be driven by the device itself. And so
Right.
it won't necessarily be easy or straightforward, at least for the larger diverters, to consolidate any different types of reporting, at least to get us the data that we're interested in. I think there is a question for some of the smaller diverters and whether or not the reporting frequency that we've devised so far in our existing regulations should be applicable to the kind of size classifications that we have it set up for right now.
But if, as this rolls out, if you ever find that the reporting under SB 88 is superfluous or is simply a make work situation, let us know. We've been known to sponsor legislation to help you out. So just a thought.
Will do.
Another check, Gary. Any email questions come in yet?
No questions at this time.
All right. I think the last two things we have are other stakeholder issues or suggestions. C sub-bullet 1 is not so much a cost of compliance issue as it is a request that has been raised by stakeholders, and it's related to guidance for underground storage and recharge type projects. I think there's some level of just confusion about what's needed for those types of projects, the different vehicles and the different options. And you know, this is an area where I feel the division and the board has been very aggressive in terms of preparing for Sigma and kind of related works. We have now 4 different options that people can pursue for underground storage projects. We have a 180-day temporary permit. We have a 5-year temporary permit due to some legislation that came out of Arambula, I think 2 years ago, AB 658. We have a streamlined administrative process, which is basically a process that we came up with internally where we've preset some conditions and terms that if people are willing to use those, then we think we can permit the application much more quickly. That would be for a standard application. And then there's just the regular standard water rights application process. So what I think we're seeing is that people don't really understand those pathways or understand the opportunities. And there was a request for some sort of workshop or discussion on what those pathways were. And I think that's something that, at least on the board side, we're very open to. It might take a while to set up, as people are probably aware. We are looking at drought conditions or emerging drought conditions this year. And there was the question up front about, would we be doing notices of water unavailability? We don't know yet. It's still a little bit too early to say, but if we do end up having to do something like that, it's going to be a really significant workload for us, and we won't really have available staff to focus on that right now. But maybe that's something that we could look at for November or December of this year, and kind of reaching out to CDFA, Department of Water Resources, probably CDFW too, and bringing all of us together to talk about what are the pathways, what are the considerations, what are the things that applicants are going to likely stumble over and need to consider before they apply. And so I think I was going to turn it over to the audience here to see if there's interest in something like that, or if there's an opportunity maybe for stakeholders to even kind of take the point in setting it up with our sister agencies.
Yeah, this is Bob. I had to kill my video because my phone's dying, but I'd be willing to work with Danny and Aqua and anybody else to coordinate some sort of recharge summit.
I see a thumbs up from Danny. So again, let's maybe coordinate in the next couple of weeks or months and see if we can figure out a way to kind of move that forward.
Got it.
And then that kind of ends my list of issues. And I wanted to turn it over to see if there are other concepts or other ideas by stakeholders or those on the phone. Okay, well, not hearing anything additional, I think I'm going to turn it back over to David.
Oh, we got Danny raised his hand. Go ahead, Danny.
Just right after you said that, something just popped into my head. I know we're a ways down the road yet, but when we get these stream gauges reestablished and working in key areas, I would think that would be an efficiency measure. I would think it would help you to have a better handle on what's actually going on out there, and relieve some of the workload that goes along with trying to figure that stuff out.
We do currently have staff assigned to the SB 19 stream gauge bill that came out of Senator Dodd's office. I think it was a year and a half ago or so.
Right.
And there's a lot of work left there. I think it's an open question whether or not that will in fact result in the establishment of additional gauges. Right now, SB 19 is the requirement to put together recommendations in a plan. And then if those were to be established and to be moved forward, there'd be a couple of years of implementation beyond that. And so it's an interesting concept. I think we're a ways off yet from realizing any potential efficiency, but something to maybe track for longer term. By longer term, I probably mean 5 to 10 years.
Hopefully I'll be retired by then, but maybe not. And the funding that SB 19 gave for this was really just to do that research and reporting back. It doesn't actually fund any installation or maintenance of stream gauges. So I do recognize it's a ways off. And my biggest fear, we were supportive of SB 19, but my biggest fear then and remains that that's going to turn into an added fee to water right holders in order to pay for that.
Yeah, so far, I think a lot of the gauge work is being directed at the Department of Water Resources. in part because it does kind of factor into their broader Bulletin 120 work and their natural flow and other kind of related work to really understand what our year-to-year supply is and how we allocate it and how we use it. There was a little bit of a fee associated with, I think we have a senior WRCE specialist that's working on SB 19 that I think our ask was like $219,000, which we absorbed. We didn't incorporate into the part of the fee increase last year. I don't see, and take this for what it's worth, I don't see, at least on our end, the division taking over managing and compiling the data for gauges. That is a core workload that goes into the Department of Water Resources right now with CDEC and kind of some of their core data management efforts. So I'm not as, I don't see that on the horizon, but again, you never can count on a legislative proposal or something like that. Although I think it would be unlikely to go to us.
All right, thank you.
So I'll step in another check with Gary. Have we received anything online before Eric probably hands it off to David?
Yeah, one question online.
Okay. Go ahead, Gary.
From Nicholas, while consolidating the filing date may be more efficient, it would be very difficult to gather all the data needed to submit all our reports by March. It would be fine if the combined deadline was July 1, like it was previously. I can comment more offline or at the next meeting.
So that's an interesting comment. And, as part of that workload, I think there's a couple of things that we could look at to address that issue. The first is, should we shift also to a water year reporting cycle? Right now we sometimes get data in almost 18 months after the fact. And what we're seeing a little bit in the division is kind of a little bit of tension between how quickly some of the data is reported, and at the same time, stakeholder calls for faster, clearer communication on kind of drought-related issues. And drought-related issues is very much tied into water demand, and that water demand estimate comes directly from the annual water use reports submitted by diverters. So if we shifted to a water year type cycle, then it would be the end of the water year, end of September. And so you have October, November, December, January, February, 5 months or so to compile if you shifted it to March 1st. That's still a fair amount of time. The other question is, maybe it's not March 1st, maybe it's somewhere in between, but we've heard from a fair number of stakeholders as well that it doesn't take 6 months to compile the water use data. Probably it does for some of the more complicated efforts, but for the vast majority of water right holders, that data is relatively straightforward. And it's unclear if 6 months is actually needed to do that.
No other questions right now.
So Eric, are you ready to hand it back off to David, or anything else you need to bring up?
I'm ready to hand it off back to you.
Okay, all yours, David.
All right. Hey, thank you, Eric. Appreciate it. So just a follow-up open discussion. If anyone has anything more on fees, if not, then we will move to our next step. So let me just pause here. Gary, do you have anything else? Any other emails?
No other emails at this time.
Okay.
And do remember that there is a slight delay. So as David finalizes our next steps, we'll come back to see if anything came through online one last time.
Okay. And I don't see any hands up at this point. Okay. So just next steps on the water rights fee side. Our next meeting is scheduled for June 10th. At that point, I'll give us some time. The May revise usually comes out around the middle of May. So we'll have an opportunity to go ahead and review that. And put some documents together and handouts, and we'll have an opportunity to kind of discuss that. In between time, if there's any questions, comments, feedback, please reach out to Glenn or I. We'll be more than happy to talk to you individually. We could, of course, go through the Zoom or the Teams process. Overall, board fee meetings, and I kind of mentioned this earlier today at the water quality. We will have another water quality fee stakeholder meeting on June 10th. In the next few weeks, though, March 9th, we'll be having a drinking water and an environmental laboratory accreditation program fee meeting. And then also on March 15th, we'll be having a fee stakeholder meeting on our on the winery order that was adopted last month. So we'll be looking at fee structures for the new winery order, and more information, of course, handouts and things like that will be coming out. Anticipated about a week prior to those meetings.
There'll be free samples at the winery general order meeting.
Yeah, I think Bob said that, not us.
Hey, Bob, you're the supplier for that one?
I'll ask the wine grape growers.
Yeah. All right. So I'll just one last time, Gary, any questions?
Yeah, one more. Nicholas would like to add to what Eric was saying about the compliance. Yes, water year reporting would be much better than calendar year, since it would match the USGS reporting and minimize winter access issues.
Okay, thank you. We'll note that. And so with that said, just in closing, I just want to thank everyone in their participation in today's meetings. Again, the participation from the stakeholders in our fee setting process, and of course in the Casa compliance process, is always key to us. And again, we appreciate the feedback, and we'll talk very soon. Thank you.